Hi guys, today I had the opportunity to speak to Danny Dichio, a former professional footballer who spent the bulk of his playing career in the Premier League. His playing career though ended in North America in MLS with Toronto FC, a club that he still works with to this day. He's on the academy coaching staff. In amongst all that, at just 22 years of age, he swapped West London and QPR for the Ligurian coast, first of all with Sampdoria, and then went down to Puglia or Salento, if you really want to be picky, and had a loan spell with Lecce. 6 months in Serie A at the height of the Italian league's powers. He talks us through that experience with good humour as ever. It was a really enjoyable conversation. As ever, let me know your thoughts on this interview. That is, if YouTube once again activates the comment section. Please give a like, a thumbs up if you enjoy the content, and I will be producing more interviews. No subtitles needed for this one. Hope you enjoy. Right, Danny, thanks for joining me this afternoon. There's a lot of nostalgia at the moment about Italian football from the 90s. I mean, even back at that period, Gazzetta Football Italia was all the rage. But I think with no football going on at the moment, I've been seeing a lot of things doing the rounds on social media, Twitter in particular. People are posting YouTube links to random games from the 90s, you know, when Serie A really was at its peak. And you actually had a season or half a season in the Italian top flight. I don't know how many people know that followed English football. I want to start with this this article I actually found in Gazzetta because I want to get your thoughts on it. So here you go. This is from the 18th of March 1997. So they knew that you were joining Sampdoria a few months before you actually did because you're out of contract. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
So here we go. Samp swoop in England to sign centre forward Dichio. A number of other sides in Italy and England were keen on the QPR striker. Did you know he's considered the best looking footballer in the world? I can hardly keep a straight face when I read that. I thought it was a wind up. So clearly most of your signing on fee went as a sort of bung to the journalist to sort of crowbar that in the headline.
Exactly. And I think it was the Italian Stevie Wonder as well that wrote that article. But no, there was a lot of talks going on prior to me coming over to Italy because the Bosman ruling had just come into effect. I think I might have been the first, me or another player I played with at Sunderland who went to Marseille, Chris Makin, were like one of the first players to kind of take up the Bosman ruling. So I was at a certain age at QPR. They'd tried to sell me to a couple of clubs, Sunderland and Wimbledon, and I really didn't want to go elsewhere in England. I was not getting on with the coach. The club were going into a different kind of situation with new coaches coming in, and I just didn't feel happy there. So it was always my dream to play in Serie A. Obviously, my dad's Italian. And there was a couple of clubs, Napoli and Sampdoria, that shown real interest. They'd sent representatives over to speak to myself, my agent, and my family, and we kind of were invited over to Genoa by Sampdoria, and we were kind of smitten with Genoa and Portofino, where they held us up, and we kind of signed that pre-contract agreement there and then.
So they really went to town then to sell it to you. They took you out to Portofino. What, you had a day out there by the beach or something? Or?
Yeah, they took me and my wife, to be clear, to Portofino, and they actually put us in a hotel there for the weekend. So they threw all the razzmatazz as they usually do when trying to sign players, and it was just a nice weekend speaking with the owners and the agents, and it was actually interesting because the coach at the time was Sven-Goran Eriksson, Pat. And he obviously knew the English setup. He'd coached in Italy and was successful over there. But I think he'd done a lot of his coaching badges either in Europe, but in England as well. So he knew the English game pretty well. And he was signing a lot of young players from Europe. There was another player from Portugal, Hugo, from Sporting Braga, that joined me at the same time. And I think they were trying to develop a new kind of squad at Sampdoria because the squad was aging at the time when I arrived.
Because this is a Sampdoria team that had won the league in the early 90s with Vialli and Mancini. And I was looking at the squad for the season that you were there, 97, 98. There were some unbelievable players in there. Mihailovic, Veron, Signori, Montella. I mean, you must have been excited about the team that you were going to join up with.
For sure, and I didn't really realize it, Pat, until getting there. And Jurgen Klinsmann actually signed for the year as well, and it was an interesting group because, as I said, Manini, the captain, was there, who was a star player for Sampdoria, won the title there. They had Veron, who was a young Argentinian. Karambur was there, who was obviously a World Cup winner with France later on, and there was just a whole heap of stars. And you mentioned it, Mihailovic, who's been going through a little bit of trouble at the moment with illness. A fantastic player, fantastic kind of leader. Didn't really get on with many people, but he took a liking to me, and it was just a very interesting experience for a young English player going over to Italy at that time.
So what was it that attracted you? Was it the strength of the league? Because late 90s Serie A was probably still considered the best league in the world. Was it the Italian heritage? Had you spoken to your dad about it? What specifically attracted you to Sampdoria and Serie A in general?
I don't know. If you go back to the World Cup, the 1990 World Cup, Pat, which was a fantastic World Cup, maybe not so much for England because it was probably one of the worst memories for me as an England fan, but it was just a real good grounding for me to see, as you just mentioned, where the home of football was, the passion for the game back in those days. And it was somewhere I really wanted to go to. And then when Sampdoria came calling, and obviously they'd won the title a couple of years prior to that, it was just an exciting prospect for me to go and join such a big team in a lovely city at such a young age.
So when you're talking to them, are they promising you, is there anything in your contract about minutes, specific playing time? You know, how much did you think you were going to feature in that first season? Or was it a case of, I think in this article here, which is from the 18th of March, so 3 months before you would have signed, it says you signed a 3-year deal. Was it a case of you wanting to settle that first season and then maybe work your way into the first team after Christmas, or did you expect to sort of hit the ground running? It must be quite interesting in terms of, you see Klinsmann sign. On the one hand, you must be delighted. Wow, I'm training with him every day. On the other, he plays up front as well.
Yeah, and it wasn't just Klinsmann that they had there as well. They had another striker that they signed from, I think it was Cagliari. He was known as Bomma Tovaglieri, who was a very good striker as well. They obviously had Montella. So they had a bunch of strikers there that were very, very good. But I wasn't really thinking too much into that. I was obviously coming off of a couple of good seasons in England, scored goals in the Premier League. Then we obviously got relegated to the Championship. And it was a next kind of stepping stone for me for where I wanted to get to. I was approached by the national team, the Italian national team, under 21 level, to join up with them. But I'd already chosen to go with the England squad because Ray Wilkins was the assistant coach at the time, and he asked me to go there. But it was just, for me, it was the next step for me in my career and my development. I was still a young player. I wanted to play. I did not realize that with the change of managers that I wouldn't play as much as I wanted to, but I wasn't going into Sampdoria thinking that I was going to be a bona fide starter straight away.
Before we get on to the change in managers, interesting you mentioned Ray Wilkins there, because actually in this article from Gazzetta, I mean, I'll send it to you afterwards if you've not read it already. It says Ray Wilkins, both a former teammate and manager of Dichio, has vouched for him. And they call you Daniele throughout the article, actually. There you go. Yeah. Daniele's strength is in the air, said the former Rossoneri midfielder, but he's also good with the ball at his feet, given that he's blessed with good technique, unusual for someone of his size. That's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? Quick thinking is important in Serie A, and Danny reads the game quickly and well. He has everything it takes to be a success. So that must have been nice, knowing that Ray Wilkins rated you so highly, and obviously he's so highly thought of in Italy to this day.
Yeah, and I mean, Ray was a big mentor to me in growing up, and he obviously played for Milan, who's my team as well, the Rossoneri, and he was an idol for me, along with the likes of Mark Haitley and the 3 Dutch guys before them that brought us so much success. But to have him as a coach and actually play for him later in his career, and then, as you said, he was held in such regard in Italy, not only for his playing career, but the way he held himself. He was fluent in Italian. He adapted to the Italian lifestyle very well. So to have him vouch for you was massive for me. But also, it was also a little bit of pressure because the likes of Ray and Mark Haitley, who had played for Milan, and other people had vouched for me, so I had to prove them right as well.
Absolutely. And it's interesting that Sampdoria seem to have this tradition of signing British players. You know, they brought in Liam Brady, they had Souness as well. Des Walker had a time there. David Platt was arguably the most successful, you know, in that sort of period. Did that help your decision as well, knowing that they did have a keen eye on the British market?
Not really, Pat, because I mean, I think Sampdoria chose me at the time because, as I said, they were trying to recruit a bunch of younger players, and I think they liked that I was part Italian, and they felt I could adapt pretty quickly. There was another young Argentinian that came over who had Italian background, Hugo, who coming from Sporting Lisbon, and there was a bunch of other younger players from Serie C that they had signed with the purpose of probably sending back out on loan to Serie B clubs. They said that to me, first of all, that they would not send me out on loan to a Serie B club, that they wanted me to fight for my place with 2 or 3 other players that they brought in from Europe's first teams. And I just felt that it was a great place for me to go, and I had a good rapport with the owners and the management team at the time, that things were going to move forward nicely for me there, and that I would settle in pretty quickly.
So when does that coaching change happen then? So you've spoken to Eriksson. Was he there in Portofino when you went there for talks, or was it just the club president?
No, just the club president and the team manager and one director at the time, and an agent working for Sampdoria. But there was no real mention of the head coach at the time, and I think that's pretty much how Italy's teams were run back then, Pat, and maybe even so a little bit now, where the clubs decide who they're going to be bringing in, and the head coaches have to work with them. And that's slowly starting to change in England as well now. There's kind of the understanding of the club are buying these players. It's not the head coach's final call. And I kind of learned that as I went over to Italy, that regardless of who was the head coach, you were the club's player first and foremost.
And so Menotti came in, is that right? The Argentine, I think he'd won the World Cup earlier in his career. What was your relationship like with him? I've read some things, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it.
To be quite honest, I didn't really have a good relationship with him. He felt like I felt like he didn't give the younger players the time of day. He was obviously coming in to try and make a stance in winning games, trying to replace a head coach like Sven-Göran Eriksson is a difficult task. Sven moved on to Lazio and took a host of players with him as well, but there was something not right from day one with him. I don't know whether it was the Argentinian England kind of barrier. Falklands had happened years before that. I didn't get the sense that he disliked me, but I also got the sense that he wasn't fond of me, whether it was as a player or as a person.
And day-to-day life, what was that like in Genoa? It's a lovely city. Samp now train in Bogliasco. It's that lovely sort of wooded training ground. Was it the same place back then? What were your memories of that?
Yes, that was our training ground. It was funny at the time as well, Pat, because there was only 2 grass fields of high standards in the Genoa region, and Genoa obviously trained at one, and we trained at that beautiful little place in Bogliasco, which was right near the coast. Me and my wife, we found a beautiful place in Nervi, which is quite close to Bogliasco. It's right on the coast there. We used to open up the windows and see the ocean.
Oh, wow.
But it was just a lovely place to live and go to work every day. And the training environment was good. It was difficult. It was hard. It was a new way of training and understanding different philosophy of how to look after yourself, which was totally different than I'd ever kind of been brought up in England. And it was a good place to be.
And how soon after pre-season, or was it during pre-season, were you told specifically, or did you get the inkling that you wouldn't be spending the season with Samp, that you would go on loan somewhere? Did they talk to you about various options? It's quite interesting for me, Danny, being a commentator, because I use Transfermarkt, the website, a lot for my research. And I'm just interested to see how reliable it is, because I look there and from what it looks like, you played against Athletic Bilbao maybe in the UEFA Cup. Is that right?
Yes. And there was no real communication with me, to be quite honest, Pat. We had a team manager at the time, Franco. His name was, a great guy, and this was a new thing for me as well, because coming over to England, all the staff that are around the team are basically technical staff. Where when I moved over to Italy, Franco was classed as the team manager. So I'm kind of asking the rest of the guys, who's this guy Franco? Like, what was he got to do with the team? And they said Franco is the guy that looks after you with anything you need off of the field. So if you need a new suit, if you need a new car, if you need this, bank details, whatever it is, he looks after that, because on the field they just want you focused on what you need to do, and then off the field they don't want you worrying about anything else. So that was a new concept for me as well. But basically talking about football and where my Sampdoria career was going, or my minutes or whatever, there was no real dialogue there, and that left me frustrated at times. I was on the bench for most of the games early on in Serie A. I played a bit in pre-season here and there and scored goals, whether it be against low Serie D teams, Serie C teams. And I thought I'd give a fair account of myself. But going into the season, I was getting more frustrated and more frustrated with the limited minutes that I was getting. And it wasn't really until we were down in the cup to Atletico Bilbao and they needed to be more direct that they sent me on. And I thought I did pretty well in that. I caused havoc to the Bilbao defense. And again, after that, there was no real talk or desire to sit down and explain why your minutes weren't happening. We weren't scoring many goals at the time. We weren't winning games. So it was kind of puzzling to me. So in the end, I took it upon myself to go and speak to the owners and say, look, I haven't come over here just to sit on the bench and waste my career away. I want to play games. So if there's a chance of me going out on loan to another Serie A club, then I want to do that, because I'm frustrated. I want to play football.
So at that stage, you'd really bought into the whole spell in Italy. You know, you're not playing for Sampdoria, and rather than thinking I want to go home, or I'm going to try and get a loan, or I can see if I can go back to England, you actually specifically asked for a loan in Serie A or in Italy in general.
Yes. And there was, as I said, before going over, there was a couple of other clubs that had shown interest. As I said, Napoli had shown interest, and there was a couple of other clubs from down south where my dad's originally from. He's from Puglia, a place called Cerignola, which is near Foggia. So with that in mind, I think my agent had spoken to a couple of the clubs down there, and Lecce had inquired whether I would like to go down there or for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I found footage actually of a goal you scored against Brescia. I want to send you the link now. Grab your phone, because it also features a post-match interview. I want to see you watch this. I want to get your reaction live from. It was a sort of classic old school feature on Rai 3 with the highlights. And it shows you scoring the goal, and then it cuts away to this post-match interview. And I'm impressed. I'd heard you speak Italian before, but I'm impressed. I mean, it's not easy to go abroad and to speak a foreign language, I think. What are your memories of that game, the game at home to Brescia, when you got your first goal?
You know what? When we went down to Lecce, it was a difficult time, because my wife and I had loved living in Genoa. As I said, we lived near the ocean, beautiful weather, beautiful food. We started to develop a good social life as well off of the field, but I just wasn't happy on the field or being in an environment where I wasn't being given my chance, Pat. So going down to Lecce was difficult, because we had to give all that up, but we gave it up in the sense that I wanted to play football, and Lecce were going to give me my chance to play in Serie A. And as you know, down south, where my dad's from as well, I've experienced it. It's a totally different place than living up north in Italy. The people are very different. The language is very different. And I would say the people are a lot harder as well. And I was used to it. I knew what I was going into, but my wife didn't. And it was tough for her off of the field. But it was an experience that I wanted us to have, and I wanted to play football, as I said.
So you've gone from living on the coast and then you've gone to Lecce, which is wonderful. If people haven't been, I fully recommend it. They call it the Florence of the South. They've got this lovely Baroque architecture. But what's great about Lecce as well, Danny, is that you've got the Adriatic to one side, the Ionian Sea to the other. Did you live on the coast again down there, or did you get a place in the city?
We lived just outside of the city because I'd taken my I'd had two dogs, like two big boxers, so we needed a garden. So we lived just outside of the city, in this big kind of farmhouse, which was all gated and stuff like that, so that the dogs could run around and cause havoc. So that was interesting in itself as well, living just outside of the city. I think if we lived in the city, it might have made life a little bit more bearable. But we were kind of out there by ourselves in the middle of nowhere. And maybe that was a cause of the problems that were going to start to happen down in Lecce.
Right. So on the pitch, it wasn't necessarily an issue. You know, you were playing more football. Obviously, you scored goals as well, and that goal in particular, I want you to look through now. But it started to take its toll, did it, on your wife in particular? What the fact that she was a bit isolated and you were obviously going to training every day.
Yeah, not only that as well, Pat, but with Lecce as well, we had a young manager in Cesar Prandelli, who was a young coach trying to make his name in the game. A very diligent coach, very strict coach. Used to give me a lot of good advice and a lot of feedback, which I wasn't used to under Menotti. But we were very, very kind of disciplined in the sense that we would travel for 2 or 3 days for away games, Pat, and even for home games, we were in a hotel the night before games, so we were like literally away for 2 days. So there was times my wife was spending a lot of time by herself in a foreign country. She didn't speak the language very well, and as you know, with a footballer, it's not only being happy on the pitch that affects your performance, but a happy wife or girlfriend off the field also helps your performance on the field as well. And you start to think about other things that are going to cause or have an effect on your performance.
So before we get to the January of that year, when you ended up joining Sunderland, if I'm not mistaken, you ended up getting promoted, that team with Quinn and Phillips. I want you to click on that YouTube link I've just sent you and talk me through this goal and this interview.
La maglietta della prima partita e del primo gol in Italia perché?
Per mio padre, in Londra. E lui ha detto quando fare un primo gol in Italia, lui ha detto aspettiamo per mia maglietta.
Che poi è di origine pugliese, o
sì,
sbaglio?
Lui è cerignolano, e mia mamma è Londra.
Modello per hobby in Inghilterra e subito goleador per professione nella terra degli avi. Che Danny Dichio, l'italo inglese dirottato a Lecce dalla Sampdoria, mostri subito dimestichezza con i fotografi non sorprende più di tanto. Nessuno però se ne aspetta altrettanta con il calcio italiano alla prima sortita, peraltro ponderata per oltre un mese da Cesare Prandelli. Dopo i riflettori s'accende lo stadio grazie al gol di Dichio altissimo che, come vedete, anzi rivedete, è davvero bravo a trovare la coordinazione giusta.
I thought you were going to sky that for a minute. It sort of sat up a bit, didn't it? You did well to keep it down.
Probably would have. You know who I think was playing for Brescia in that days? I think Pirlo was playing for them.
Yeah, he came on. I saw that. That's a good memory. So did he really have an impact on you that day? Did you see him come on and think this guy's a player, or was it just later you sort of put two and two together?
I think he was still a pretty young guy at the time as well, Pat. If I'm not mistaken, he grew up through the Primavera at Brescia as well. And he was a player that really come into prominence that year. He was starting to make sub appearances, but then after I think it was a year or two playing for Serie A, I think it was in 99 maybe, or that he moved on to Milan. So he was a player with obviously like great qualities. There was another player at Fiorentina, a young player that was part of the Italian setup that had spoken to me about joining the under-21s as well. I forgot his name. He was a really good player at the time, same age. And it's kind of when you look back on things and you see either through the stats that you're looking on certain websites that you see certain players that you played against that were just starting their careers or at their on loan from their big clubs in Serie A at that time, that you recognize that you played against some pretty big hitters.
Yeah, and you also played under some pretty big hitters as well. You mentioned Cesare Prandelli before. It took Italy to the final of the Euros in 2012 as well. What were your memories of him? You mentioned about the cigar.
You know what, he was, as I said, a very diligent coach. He was tactically very astute. I think he knew what he was working with at Lecce as well. He had a crazy president that kind of run the law over everything that was being done at Lecce and wanted things done a certain way. But Prandelli was a forward-thinking coach. He tried to bring in certain players to adapt to his style of play and what he wanted to do. And I'm just really happy that he went on to bigger and better things, because I don't think he was really appreciated at Lecce.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the big players you played against, like Pirlo. I looked in that Lecce squad. There was also Giannini, who was the Roma legend, Il Principe. What was he? Was he coming towards the end of his career? Could he still do it in training? Was he someone that impressed you?
He was a guy that was probably one of the most professional players that I've ever kind of been on a team with. Just the way he looked after himself. He was coming towards the end of his career. He was injured for the most part, and I was just gutted that I didn't get to play with him as much as I could. I trained with him and played with him a couple of times in the cup, I think it was, but he was really struggling with kind of niggling little injuries at the time, Pat, and I think he was kind of in the sense of that I'm going to call it a day.
You mentioned that you're a big Milan fan growing up with your dad. Did you play at San Siro that season? Did you get to play against either Inter or Milan?
I actually did, and it's a funny story, to be quite honest, Pat, because we, with Lecce, we went up to Milan and we managed to get a 1-0 win. And I think it was Boban, or it was either Boban, I think it was Boban, got red carded early on in the game. They still hammered us. We were all over the place. They were all over us. And my family had come, obviously a lot of my family lived in Milan, and they'd come to watch the game. And because we beat them, half of them had left and half of them were kind of hovering around the players. It wasn't really a bar, it's like a players' lounge afterwards, and they didn't speak to me.
Proper diehard fans. Yeah, I love
it. They were very, very offish with me, and I was like, oh, I don't get to see you guys much, and this is how you're going to treat me. And they were like, well, you took 3 points off of us today, so there's a reason.
And so you're enjoying your football now at Lecce, but it's a bit tricky off the field. Did the club want to keep you? What was the conversation? So presumably there's 3 parties now. You've got Sampdoria that are keeping tabs on you, because they're obviously your parent club. Lecce, where you're getting a bit more game time, and you've obviously scored that goal against Brescia, and the team are picking up some wins and points, like you said, against Milan. But you're becoming increasingly frustrated with how the situation is off the pitch. When did you start to think about going back to England in January?
It was probably around Christmas time. I'd been back home. Obviously, we have the Christmas break in Italy, which was a new thing for me as well. And then going home, seeing the family, seeing my friends. And while I was back in England, obviously a couple of clubs had spoken to me and said, what are you wasting yourself away over there for when you can be coming back here to play football again? And I was kind of stuck in between, do I sit this out in Italy, or do I come back and kick on again in England, where I've probably got a bigger name and more kind of strength to push on and hopefully get back into the England under-21 team. I was a little bit too old for that, but there was an England B team at the time, and I wanted to push through to that and just start enjoying my football and life again. And I spoke to my agent, and my old manager at QPR, Jerry Francis, was at Spurs at the time, and he'd made contact with Sampdoria to see about the availability. Sunderland had been pushing again with Peter Reid, and they wanted me. They were in the Premier League, and I think they were just going to get relegated. And there was a couple of other clubs, and I spoke to my wife, or my girlfriend. We hadn't been married yet, and she was really unhappy. And she said, "Look, I will stay and do whatever you want to do, but at the end of the day, when things started to go a little bit sour at Lecce and I wasn't playing as much and I was coming off the bench, not starting, I said, this is it for me. I want to try and push through in January." And that was when the transfer windows had just started opening again. And there was a period where you could make the deal happen. And as you said, I was partly owned by Sampdoria and Lecce. Because when you go on loan in Italy, you're partly owned. They pay for 50% of what the player is worth. So there was all kind of stumbling blocks that were starting to happen there.
And so looking back, do you have fond memories of that time in Italy? Did that have any impact on, obviously, for those that don't know, and the clue's sort of in the question with the T-shirt you're wearing, but you finished your career in MLS with Toronto FC, first ever goal scorer, first ever red card, if I remember rightly, which I know you love that story as well. Was that a factor in the decision to move abroad again at the end of your career? Did you feel like you had unfinished business after the sort of Italy spell had only lasted 6 months?
You know what? That wasn't a factor of coming over to North America. I speak about my time in Italy to my wife a lot, and I really feel if we went over there when I was a little bit older, Pat, I think we would have stuck it out. I think we would have probably stayed and lived there and played there throughout most of my career, because it was a great place to live and to be part of. But it was really down to the game minutes, playing minutes, and feeling wanted by the actual club. And I just, at both clubs, I didn't feel like that at all. I felt like I was either a bit part player at a critical time in my career where I should be playing week in, week out, or being part of the starting team. And I just didn't feel that way at both clubs. And whether it was because I was a foreign player and the dialogue and communication was 0 to none at Sampdoria. It was a little bit better at Lecce, but they were going through all kinds of off the field stuff. And I just thought this was not right for me. So I wanted to get home. But I really feel if we had a young family and me and my wife were married and we were more settled, I would have stuck it out and tried to push through and maybe go around different clubs in Italy and try and find that spot that was right for me, like I did with Toronto FC. Luckily, I found that right spot where I was wanted and was playing and scoring goals, and that's why we've stayed here, and our life is very happy over here.
Absolutely. Just to finish up, Danny, you mentioned about you don't know if it was because you're a foreigner, etc. I get the sense, as an Englishman living in Italy and working in football, that there is still a bit of snobbery towards English players from Italians. They always used to say, "Oh, England would have been half decent if they'd had a goalkeeper." You know what I mean? I don't particularly think that David Seaman was a bad goalkeeper in world terms, but we've seen it recently. Joe Hart came over here, didn't really happen from at Torino. Micah Richards, similar at Fiorentina. Ashley Cole at Roma was considered not a success either. And the only reason now we're seeing Ashley Young come over to Inter is because Conte has been in England in the Premier League, maybe knows what he's about, brought in Victor Moses. Obviously he's Nigerian, but he played all of his football growing up in England. What do you think it is about English players that makes them perhaps struggle in Serie A? Is it a cultural clash? Are they sort of battling against prejudice from the word go, or what do you think it is?
I think it's really dependent on what club they're going to, Patrick. You look at Roma now with Chris Smalling, who was ousted at Manchester United, but he's been welcomed in by the club, by the head coach, obviously, by the players, the fans, and he's done reasonably well. And Italy are known for their world-class defenders. Okay, supposedly world-class defenders. Back in the day, they had world-class defenders. For me, at the moment, Italy do not have world-class defenders. If you rule an aging Chiellini out, then maybe there's some younger guys coming through. But I just feel there's a little bit of snobbery towards English football, and I still speak to Italian guys over here where they say we don't like your football, it's too direct. But then I look at some teams like Inter Milan, or I look at even Roma at times. They try to get the ball back to from back to front as quickly as possible. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. I just think there's always going to be that banter, which we call it, but in the media and through certain coaches, there's always going to be respect through the coaches. But I still think that there's a little bit of battle between the two countries and who were the originators of the game of football.
One final question. I know you work now as a pundit on the Premier League over in Canada. Would you like to work on Italian football as well one day?
I'd love to. I would love to. I still watch a lot of it. Obviously, a big Milan fan. They've been killing me for the last 5 or 6 years. But I think the game is evolving over there, Patrick. I think new coaches are coming into Serie A, or not so much new coaches, but coaches are being given a chance that have been successful in either Serie B or other countries, and they're forward-thinking coaches. They're not stuck in their ways. It's not like we had in England where we had that manager merry-go-round, just going around and round, and it was the same type of football, same coaches, same players getting moves. I think it's a little bit different in Italy now. They're giving the chance to younger players. I'm really happy with like the under 21s and even the U18s that I've seen play recently, in the 17s that are very, very good. So hopefully they'll be given their chance, because I really feel that, like England had a couple of years ago, Pat, where we had to press the reset button and bring some of these younger players through and give them the confidence. I think Italy are doing that as well now. So I think it's going to add up to Serie A being a lot more competitive. I think it's not going to be so easy for Juve to win the title year in, year out now, which has been boring to me. And I think it's going to be a lot more competitive and enjoyable to watch.